G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 fantasy video. Today we're looking at my race week preview and final thoughts ahead of the Brazilian Grand Prix this coming weekend. As always, if you're new around here, you're enjoying the content, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate all of the support from you guys so far this season. So as always with this video, break down the chip usage opportunities on the table this weekend, all the key talking points, all that good stuff coming out ahead of the weekend, and then we'll revisit some team selection dilemmas, situations, all that stuff towards the end of the video. So in terms of chip usage, lots of opportunity to use some of the more powerful chips on the sprint weekend. Brazil, the last of the 6 in 2023. I know a number of you watching this have probably used them all. Some of you may have saved Limitless or Extra DRS for this last race. And I think it's a very good time to use one of them if you've got that in your pocket. A popular chip for many this weekend is the Limitless chip. And given the emergence of McLaren and Mercedes over the last few weeks, they are becoming very attractive assets to have in that Limitless lineup for Brazil. I've got, I guess, a skeleton of a Limitless team on the screen here that I think is probably the bare bones that you can start with, build out the rest of the team around that. I'd have Red Bull and Mercedes as the two constructors in there. Red Bull just because of the fact that they are, with Max Verstappen, the best constructor to own. Mercedes for me, I think because they are slightly lower owned, a little bit more expensive, a great opportunity to get that asset into your team for 1 week. Make use of the fact that Lewis Hamilton is, with the exception of obviously those DNFs in Qatar and that disqualification in the US Grand Prix, looking really good, very consistent, very reliable, coming off the back of another podium in Mexico, which obviously brings him into the equation as an asset to have in that team as well. Lando Norris, another really consistent asset to own. A great drive last week, has had 3 40-point performances in the last 3 weeks. So another one in a rich vein of form fantasy-wise. That leaves obviously 2 driver slots. And I think for me, given the out-of-form nature of Sergio Perez at the moment, even though I've got Red Bull constructor, Max is ultimately pushing that points projection ahead for Red Bull on his own. If Perez finishes the race, they're on for a very good haul. But even without him, Red Bull's still going to score around 60 points on a sprint race weekend. So I think that leaves you with Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, George Russell to fill up those last 2 spots. Mercedes are historically very good around Interlagos. We'll get into that momentarily. So I think for me, if I was using it this weekend, George Russell does appeal to me. I know he's been a little off the pace this year, maybe not quite the driver we saw from him 12 months ago, but he did have that excellent result in Brazil. He got his maiden win last season, that breakthrough victory. So obviously a good omen for him. And then you've got Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, both obviously featuring around the podium most of the time. They're in a very competitive car, a Ferrari that's very quick on the straights. We've got a couple of very fast sections in Brazil. And there's talk, again, I'll get to this later in the video, of a potential Ferrari grid penalty for new engine components. There was speculation of that before Mexico. Ferrari didn't take any penalties there. So it's very possible that Ferrari could take something quite like that heading into Brazil, and as a result make someone like Charles Leclerc a very good asset to own with that overtakes positions gained upside. The other point or question I guess I've received a little bit in the lead up to this weekend is if I activate Limitless, or can I make trades before the weekend starts, then activate the Limitless, and will those trades I make flow through into the following week? In short, the answer is no. As far as I'm aware, not that I've tried it, but from what I've been told on Twitter, if you make trades, then you activate the wildcard or the Limitless, for instance, those trades are going to reset. So the team you had in Mexico, for instance, is going to be the team you have ahead of Las Vegas the following week. So any of those trades, if you're trying to make money, you're worried about being priced out, unfortunately, I don't believe that's going to work. For extra DRS boost, for the few of you that have got that left, Verstappen's the obvious candidate, I think, for me. Their consistency, performance, fastest car on the grid, you know the drill. In terms of the 2 times options, I think Hamilton and Norris stand out to me as the best options, probably because of the fact that they are the 2 names outside of Max first on the team sheet for a Limitless team. You know, Hamilton, that Mercedes has very good race pace, historically very good around Brazil. I'm going to say that a lot in this video, so just stick with me for a moment. And then Lando Norris, again, I think he's due for that breakthrough win of his. George Russell got that at Interlagos last year. Can Lando Norris make that his first win in Brazil this year. It's very much a coin flip on both of them. I think they're both great options, both very consistent, very low DNF rate. Lewis has only had one this year, which was in Qatar. He had that disqualification as well, I know, but that was largely not his fault. And then Lando Norris hasn't had a DNF this year either, along with Max. So you got two very reliable, very consistent drivers. Flip a coin, unless you like the sound of one or the other. Go with your gut. As far as the other chips are concerned, I will just quickly cross out wildcard and final fix, both very team dependent. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be using, I don't have the wildcard. Sorry, I have the wildcard. Don't know if I'm going to be using it this weekend unless I suddenly take a -4 or a -8 out of the blue, which I probably won't do. I don't have final fix, but again, we saw something like Kevin Magnussen last year on P1 out of nowhere because of the wet weather. So just think about, if something like that happens in qualifying, whether or not that's the right time to use it. No negative, wouldn't use it on a sprint race weekend ordinarily. Save that for Las Vegas. We haven't raced there before, street circuit, all that kind of risk that comes with, I guess, a track that has narrower straights, narrower turns. But I want to go back to autopilot. I know I just skipped over it before. That's the other chip I've got left in my pocket. So I've got to use 2 chips in the next 3 weeks. I'll almost certainly use one this weekend. Autopilot for me, before this week, I wasn't so sure I'd be using it at a sprint weekend because I think over the course of an entire race weekend on a sprint, Max Verstappen is more often than not going to outscore the rest of the competition. He's only been outscored 6 times this season, and 5 of those were non-sprint weekends. The only time he's been outscored on a sprint was when Sergio Perez outscored him in that Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where Perez ultimately won that race. The other 5 times, as I said, non-sprints: Bahrain, Australia, the Netherlands, Singapore, and Mexico. So last week, Lando Norris, highest point scorer. In all 5 of those races, interestingly enough, the highest scoring driver had the driver of the day vote in their pocket. So I think for me, I'm looking at Lewis Hamilton. I probably will have Lando Norris, and I will almost certainly have Max Verstappen as well in my team. All potential race winners, all potential guys that can go out and score the highest amount of fantasy points on that weekend. Now, I think at a circuit like Brazil, Hamilton has a very good chance of doing very well. He's got a great record there. And he may well be in line for driver of the day too. As I said, every single time Max has been outscored, that person has won driver of the day as well. So if you think Lewis is in with a shot at winning the race, there's a very good chance he could come away with the driver of the day at a circuit that he is an honorary, or a country that is an honorary citizen at. So think about that when you're making a decision for autopilot. That's something that's heavily weighing on my mind. I may well move ahead with using that, but I also want to have someone like Norris or Charles Leclerc, who I'll get to just in a second, as options that could also be fallbacks. I guess the other option to use it is a non-sprint. We've only got 3 races left, so not a lot of optionality, but Las Vegas, as I said before, we haven't raced there. There's a little bit of risk with that uncertainty. Maybe I just throw it on that weekend instead if I decide to go with wildcard this weekend. But lots of variables. I guess once I land on my team, I'll know what chip I want to use for this week. For the key talking points, now there's a lot of kind of interesting facts that have come out of the last kind of few days or so since Mexico. But I think something that stood out to me in particular for Interlagos is Mercedes' record at this track. Now, they have been building up to, I guess, in the second half of the season at least, a car that is going to close the gap to Red Bull. Their race pace looks very, very good. I'm quite impressed with what Lewis in particular has been able to get out of that car. And he comes to a circuit that he does have a very good record at. I'll just bring something up I saw on Twitter earlier today, where in just about every single race since 2007, he's had a pretty, with the exception of the DNF sprinkled in between, a couple of really good drives for that matter, but some just consistently great results across the board. 3 wins, I've said. He's been on the podium 7, I thought it was 8, but maybe it's only 7 times. And then obviously George Russell, great there. Bottas, nabbed or had a couple of really sensational drives back when he was at Mercedes. So obviously I think that's really encouraging for Lewis Hamilton, the Mercedes constructor, have that kind of omen, that great record, that level of comfort being able to navigate the track And some of those kind of, particularly those first couple of turns off the line, can get a little bit hairy. So someone that has the experience and that ability to just kind of get from the start to the finish without really much issue at all is obviously very reassuring. So a great sign there for someone like Lewis Hamilton, if you want him in your team. Obviously pointed out George Russell got that breakthrough there, I think, and Mercedes getting 6 out of the last 8 wins at Interlagos is unbelievably good. It reminds me a little bit of Max at the Austrian Grand Prix. His record there is also sensational. So I don't try to read into too many omens when it comes to fantasy, because it is very much a luck-based game to a certain extent. But this is a very good sign for someone like Lewis Hamilton if you plan on getting him into your team this week. Something else to note is the potential grid penalty about Charles Leclerc. Now, I touched on it earlier. It was speculated it might have come about at the Mexico Grand Prix. Obviously, Ferrari didn't take any grid penalties there. I do wonder if this is the weekend that Ferrari ultimately proceed with that. There hasn't been anything I've seen so far in the news about whether or not Carlos do take grid penalties for new engine components. But I guess the reasons why I would suspect it could be possible at Brazil is, first of all, because if we look ahead for the remaining 2 races on the calendar, that's Las Vegas. It's a circuit we haven't raced there before. Not really sure as to how they could navigate a track being at the very back that they haven't been at before. I just don't know if that necessarily makes a lot of sense. And then Abu Dhabi makes absolutely no sense. To take a grid penalty in the last race of the season seems very arbitrary. You may as well just run the engine component and hope it lasts until the very end. So I think taking an engine penalty, if they need to, makes the most sense at Brazil. It's a circuit that has a lot of overtakes, and with a car that Ferrari in the next point has a great race simulation pace, I just think makes the most sense out of the remaining options on the calendar. So I'll just quickly bring the next thing I wanted to show you guys up. Albert Fabrega, I'm not even sure if I've actually pronounced his surname correctly, put these out on Twitter, not in relation to the rumor he posted earlier in the week, which pretty much broke F1 Twitter. We won't get into that, but he's obviously got these simulation times. Ferrari is second on the list. Now, he doesn't have the time split between Ferrari, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, etc., but it is encouraging that Ferrari are up there. So I do think, if they are looking like the team to beat or out of the teams below Red Bull, then I think that logically makes a lot of sense. If they're going to be competitive, then maybe someone like Charles Leclerc, if we're going back to the grid penalty, becomes another candidate to have in your team alongside Max, alongside Lewis, if you want to use that autopilot chip. I'm not so sure if I can or have the flexibility to do that, but if you do have a little bit of extra budget, you want to go for another differential like Charles. There aren't going to be many strategists in the top 10,000 that are going to be running Charles Leclerc, because Max and Lewis are both very premium options, and Lando Norris a very popular one for that matter. But given there is going to be, I guess, that opportunity for Ferrari for those overtakes to make their way through the field, I think is a good sign. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I guess on the topic of overtakes, there's something else I guess I wanted to call out before we get into the number of overtakes we saw at Interlagos last season. But I think this kind of segues nicely from Ferrari. A couple of really kind of high-powered parts of the circuit where particularly this 1.3 kilometer straight through sectors 3 into sector 1, I think Ferrari, Red Bull, even Williams are going to look very good there. Also through, I guess, the bottom half of the circuit too. So great opportunity for overtakes. Great opportunity for cars with some straight line speed to capitalize on that. And then you might see someone like a McLaren, for instance, do quite well in those fast to medium speed corners. But I think Mercedes is going to do quite well in sector 3. Their slower speed corner pace is obviously very good. So I wonder, even if they lose a little bit of time through sectors 1 and 2, they make that breakthrough in sector 3. Notwithstanding that, I think it's going to be a pretty open race. Those overtakes will open the door for drivers like Alex Albon, Yuki Tsunoda, Joe to all kind of make their mark. So yeah, it is it is exciting. I think there is going to be plenty of opportunity for drivers to capitalize on that wider track. And as I've shown or got here on the screen, Sao Paulo 62 overtakes in 2022, the most of any circuit on the calendar. Behind, I think this was it was Circuit of the Americas, and then Bahrain. So a great sign for I guess a lot of drivers to make up positions over the course of the entire race. The last thing I just wanted to touch on was obviously the chance of rain. Keep that in the back of your mind. I think it's about 70% on Friday. It drops off to, I think, 20-30% Saturday, and almost no rain on the Sunday. That could spring another surprise like we saw with K-Mag when he got P1. It was the sprint. It wasn't, I think, for the Grand Prix, but for the sprint. K-Mag obviously shocked us all with that wet weather when George Russell, I believe, put it in the wall. So you never know. We might see someone else spring that surprise. We saw a Daniel Ricciardo P4 in qualifying last week in Mexico. Maybe he or someone else can replicate a performance for the ages this coming weekend. So those guys with final fix, as I pointed out at the start of the video, if you see something surprising, think about deploying that if you're not already piled in on like your Limitless or your Extra DRS, for instance. So I think I'll quickly pivot into what my team is shaping up for this weekend. I went through this in quite a lot of detail in my team selection video. I'll have it at the end of the video. Do check it out if you haven't already taken a look at it. But this was what my team was like in Mexico. I don't even need to say anything about Sergio Perez. Get the hell out of here. You're not coming back this season, my friend. And I obviously like Lewis Hamilton. Now, there's a couple of different ways I can get to him. I'm on the lower side of budget, unfortunately, given I've had a couple of disastrous weekends of late. But if I did want to make just one quick switch, and I am confident that George Russell, for instance, can match Lewis Hamilton. I'm not so confident he can from what we've seen lately, but if I think so, he's a very easy switch for Sergio Perez. Now, I may have to use my wildcard if I take a -4, but the other route for me is to get in Lewis Hamilton and the Mercedes constructor. If I'm confident that Lewis is going to put in a drive for the ages, I would ultimately throw the autopilot if I ran this build as well. But I am just very conscious that even with Sergio Perez out of form, he doesn't even need to get in the points. He just has to finish the race, avoid that dreaded -20, and Max Verstappen will lift that team into, the 80+ points territory on a sprint weekend. So do I feel confident enough that Perez will have a stinker, that Lewis and George will be around the podium places? It's hard to say. I think Mercedes will do well, but I'm not so sure over an entire weekend if they've got it in them. I'd happily eat my words, but that Red Bull just looks so dominant at the moment. So that's potentially one option I am considering. The other option I'm probably leaning towards more so right now is sticking with Red Bull and then downgrading Oscar Piastri, getting in Lewis. The problem is this would only be 2 trades as well, is probably bringing back in Yuki Tsunoda. So I know I look like doubling up on AlphaTauri, maybe not the bravest option to some, but I would point out that in Albert's simulations, AlphaTauri is the 5th fastest car for race pace over this coming weekend. So we saw Daniel, get that P7 in Mexico in the Grand Prix. Yuki looked on for a points finish as well before that incident with Oscar. So I do wonder if there's enough there for the AlphaTauris to be competitive. Yuki also had a couple of really good sprint performances recently, 11 in Qatar, and obviously that 30-point haul in the US Grand Prix. So do I double down on AlphaTauri, make 2 trades, throw the autopilot on these guys, and then hope that the overtakes, which Tsunoda is now the de facto overtake king in the budget category, is that enough? Perhaps it is. I'm not so sure. But if I obviously can't stretch to this team, and I thought about running it last week. I didn't, which has unfortunately priced me out. I'm 0.2 short for Alex Albon. I think for me, I'd much prefer Albon over Tsunoda if you can make that happen. I'm not really confident. I mean, Ricciardo's still lower than Sargent anyway, so I wouldn't I wouldn't be trying to move anything else around. I'm pretty sold on Norris, Verstappen, Hamilton, Red Bull, and McLaren as good or nice to have assets this weekend. So Sonoda, but if you can get to Alex Albon, I think great. I think the Williams is that straight line speed, as I said before, will look really competitive through sectors 1 and 2, or at least that pit straight certainly as well. So if you can get to that, great. But I think they're probably the teams I'm leaning towards at the moment. There'd have to be something drastic, such as that Ferrari grid penalty, to make me want to pivot elsewhere. I don't even think I can. I'm just really getting ahead of myself here. Getting in Charles Leclerc and then probably Hulkenberg, but that's 3 trades right there. That would be the that would be the wild card, I would say. So it kind of defeats the point of taking a hit to get Lewis in for the autopilot if I'm kind of strong arming myself over autopilot versus wildcard. I guess I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think you get the idea. Realistically, where I'm at is very much a Max, Lando, Lewis, Red Bull, McLaren skeleton for the non-limitless teams. I put the limitless teams on before, but if you guys have any kind of other points of view on what your team could look like, what you think the best assets are to own this weekend, particularly for any I haven't already talked about, then let me know in the comments below, because I am certainly all for a bit of a differential play this late in the season. There's obviously a little bit of rank for me to catch up now that I'm languishing in the 8,000s. But I'm confident that with someone like Lewis Hamilton, who is a pretty pricey differential, it could be a very attractive option to have this weekend. Hopefully does enough to lift my team closer to that 5K. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I will be back on FanAmp this Friday with Adam from F1 Fantasy HQ. As you can see on the screen, always a great supporter of the channel. We're doing a deadline stream 1 hour before qualifying. So going to answer all of your burning questions, all of the team dilemmas. You can drop them in our FanAmp base. We'll answer them live on stream. And you can obviously enter in to the weekly giveaways we have with Fifth Gear Gums, our partner that offers up a $50 gift card for apparel on their website. An awesome, apparel group of guys, really good quality merchandise that you should definitely check out. But all of that information is going to be in the description below. As I said, we'll be live on stream an hour before qualifying on the Friday. So feel free to drop by, ask us some questions, and we'll happily get back to you in the moment. But that's it for now, guys. Thanks very much for dropping by. Good luck with your teams this weekend, and I'll see you all very soon.